Oh my God, I swear the one thing that people do not talk about is how many times that we have to sit and fidget in front of the camera before we actually hit record. Hello lovelies, it is your girl Davina Daras. Today we are talking about a very personal topic of mine. As of late, I would say the past couple years, I have become very passionate about learning about my ancestry. So for a little background, I am biracial, white mom, black dad, typical. On my mother's side, I am predominantly English and French with a little bit of Swedish, Dutch, and German and Irish in there. And on my father's side, I spent my whole life not knowing what the fuck I was. This was due to the fact that my mother and my father, they were not partners per se. They were lovers. My parents were short-term lovers. They met one evening on the dance floor and had a bit of fun for about 6 months, and then all of a sudden I arose. So that was the story of my mother and my father. And my father was not a part of my life. I met him once when I was a child, and that was an interesting experience. I would say I connected with him. You know, he was my dad. He was the man that I did not know and the man that I wanted to know. And he was the only person who kind of looked like me. And when I say that, meaning he was another person of color. I grew up in the state of Maine, which is the second most whitest state in the entire US. I think for a while we were number one until Vermont beat us. And growing up here as a biracial kid was weird. It was definitely very, I would say, confusing as a child, simply because my whole family's white, all my friends were white. There was nothing around me that looked like me. There was nothing that reflected me. And I was exposed to people of color via the media, the internet. You know, I had the exposure digitally, but I didn't have any type of experience spiritually or, you know, in real life. So meeting my dad was very comforting for me as a little girl. I specifically remember that, not only just wanting to feel connected to him, but also just wanting to feel connected to that part of my heritage. However, my dad was not a family man, to say the least, or he wasn't with me, and he didn't stick around. I only knew him for about 6 months, and that was very, very hard for me. You know, when I was young, I think I kind of blacked out the pain of that, and I just kind of adapted to my way of living, and I was like, oh, well, I barely knew him, so it's not like he broke my heart, but in a lot of ways he did. And not only did I feel rejected by him, but I felt rejected by my African heritage. I felt very disconnected and unchosen by this part of my bloodline. And that was the way I internalized it. I took it as, not only am I not good enough for him, but I'm not good enough for this side of myself that I am so desperately yearning to connect with. And that's a very hard thing as a child to feel. And I felt very alone. I felt very alienated in every way. You know, I wasn't really enough for the white kids, but I felt like I wasn't enough for the very small amount of black kids that I ever met in my whole childhood. And so for years, I think I kind of just disconnected from myself, and I started to straighten my hair when I was 11. I just felt very disconnected from my body, and there were so many things going on, just low self-esteem, being bullied, all of that. But I feel like amongst all of the turbulent waves, I kind of just lost that ability and desire to want to connect with me. And it's funny because I always say that when I was a child, that was when I felt the most connected to my African heritage. Like as a little girl, before I met my dad and shortly after, like I was a child that lived outdoors. I was athletic. The music was in my blood, the music and the rhythm. There were so many things, just being a born dancer and my liveliness, my theatrical personality, just so many things about my characteristics. I felt Like I was very connected to Africa in that way, just in my being and the way that I carried myself. I did not feel like I aligned with the culture of New England, the people around me. That's not trying to put a generalization on everyone, because obviously everybody's different, but me and Maine just never made sense. So I spent a long time feeling very, very disconnected and feeling like I was only half of a person. And I got used to that. When I was 17 and I lived in London with my sister for a few months, that helped in the sense of I was exposed to more diversity. I was exposed to a broad spectrum of European culture, but I still didn't really feel like there was a lot of African culture around me. So although I no longer felt weird in the sense of I didn't judge myself for being different visually, but I still didn't feel spiritually connected to such a sacred part of me. And I spent most of my life with that being the norm. I kind of just came to peace with the fact that I didn't know anything about my background or my history, my father's side of the family. I kind of just adapted and was like, well, I know who I am as a person, as a soul, and that's enough, which is fair. I did become more spiritual and I got into a little bit of Kemeticism. I became very attracted to ancient Egyptian history and learning certain practices through their spirituality, and that made me feel connected to Africa in one way. However, I'm not Egyptian, but even so, that was, I feel like, my way of just trying to connect. And the symbolism of the Ankh, I got that tattooed on myself, and it is my favorite tattoo. It's very small, but it is so precious and means a lot to me. That was, for me, for a while, like, it was enough. I was like, okay, I feel connected to Africa in this way, and maybe that's all I will ever get, and I have to make peace with that. Until about 5 years ago, I learned some sad information, but this information was very helpful for me. I learned that my father had passed in 2017. My sister had found his obituary and I read it, obviously. One of the things that I did learn about him was that he was born in a small town right outside of New Orleans. It's interesting because New Orleans was always a city that spoke to me. I always say that like the cities that always called to me since I was a kid was London and New Orleans. And it's just interesting how that connects to our ancestry, our bloodline. Obviously London, more of my mother's side, and New Orleans, my father's. And historically, New Orleans is a very heavy place. The energy of that city is very, very heavy. And I think not everybody can handle it because of what took place there many, many years ago. Everyone, first of all, everyone in America should go there and should educate themselves and should be exposed to the reality of what America is, which is a whole other topic that I can't even begin to get into because then this video will just turn into me fucking ranting and being emotional and mad. When I learned that information, I was like, okay, I really have to go now because there is just such a strong pull. And I knew nothing about my dad. All that I knew was he was a lover of music. And since I was a baby, I loved to dance. The music was in my veins. And also just knowing what music means to African culture in general and what dance means to us, everything just made sense. And I was like, I just have to go to this city. I have to. And for my 25th birthday, I went. My sister is wonderful and she took me there for my 25th birthday. When I was there, it felt like my soul was radiating outside of my body. It was the closest that I ever felt to feeling at home. Just like the way people spoke to me. Oh God, I always get emotional when I talk about New Orleans. Oh, pull it together. Anyway, just the way people spoke to me and the way that I felt there in the environment, the music in the air. It was like, I always felt like my whole life I could just hear this sound, like this rhythm echoing in my mind. And it just always made me want to dance and always made me want to move. Like I have just spent my life dancing through life. And being in New Orleans, it was like everything made sense. It was like all the pieces just fell together. And for the first time, I was in a space where I didn't feel weird. I didn't feel like an alien. You know, New Orleans is such a beautiful multicultural pot, but it has such a strong emphasis on the African community, given our history there and just the population of Black people there. It was just amazing to be somewhere where I wasn't questioning anything about myself. And it was something that I was not used to. And it was weird. I was there for about a week when I was 25, and I came back home, obviously, and kind of just like went back to my life. And I don't want to say I forgot about that experience, but I still didn't really know much about my ancestry or about me. I didn't have as much information as I do now, and I'm still learning more. And even though I felt so good and at home, it still felt weird to feel that goodness. Forgive me, something happened and I had to like switch out the video and I changed my audio. Let's continue. So like I was saying, it was not normal for me to feel that comfortable in myself or in my environment. And so when I went back home, I still felt that urge to want to connect more. And when I was about, I think I was 27. When I was 27, my sister, once again, she ended up buying me a 23andMe test, and I took it, not trying to like give a shout out to them, but hey, I took the test and I discovered that I am Nigerian and I am Ghanaian. It's crazy to me because Nigeria was the one part of Africa that I always felt, once again, called to. I always felt like there was a pull towards that specific place. It was like Nigeria and Egypt. Obviously, Egypt has a very big place in the media and everybody just glamorizes it. But Nigeria, I had learned about when I was a very young child. So when I discovered that I was Nigerian predominantly, I was like, that's wild. That's crazy. There are some things that are just in your blood and you feel them through, maybe it's generations passed down, it's in your soul. It's undescribable. It's just intuitive. And since then, I have progressively chosen to accept and embrace myself. For instance, with my hair. I straightened my hair for 15 years because I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't want people to look at me differently. I just wanted to shrink myself. And growing up in a place like New England, that is very common for most people. New England's pretty conservative, although most of New England is very liberal and very progressive. At the same time, there are just mentalities of conservatism that still exist here and I think are very hard for a lot of people to let go of. And for someone like me, being self-expressive, theatrical, sensual, loves to dance, loves music, is extroverted, that was not the greatest fit for me. I felt strange in the eyes of everyone. So straightening my hair, for me, symbolically, was a way of trying to blend, of trying to not stand out as much. I straightened my hair. I tamed my lioness side. I got quieter. I just shrunk myself, ultimately. And in my 20s has been about healing those wounds, coming home to myself, embracing myself, not being afraid of who I am. And when I started embracing my hair over about a year and a half ago, I have not touched her with a straightener, and I fucking never will ever again, okay? Because first of all, curly hair is the best, bitches. So, second of all, my hair is just so happy and healthy and free. Like when I look in the mirror, I just feel like I continue to see more of who I am. And I feel like that tie to Africa is just so prominent in me now than it ever has been. And with all this, I decided I had to go back to New Orleans. So I went there again, and this time for my 28th birthday. I was there 2 months ago. Being there this time was even more emotional and even better because I felt like my ancestors were with me. I felt like my dad was with me. And for the first time, I didn't feel rejected by any parts of me because I was no longer rejecting myself. And I was only there for maybe 4-ish days. But at one point, I found myself in the Louis Armstrong Park in Congo Square. And I had this experience that just sticks with me so much. I went to Congo Square for the first time, and there was this gentleman named Mark, and he was a sweet older man. He didn't work there. He was just passionate about the square, and he wanted to educate people about it. And it was me and another girl. And he was like, hey, beautiful, like, come over here, baby. Like, let me just tell you all about the history. And, you know, he was telling me everything and telling me about the sacred land. And he was telling me how that's where the slaves would gather however many 100 years ago after a long day of suffering and slaving away, all the horrible shit that we know that my ancestors went through. And the one thing they would do on this land is they would sing and they would chant and they would dance. And that was their spiritual practice. That was how they connected with them, with each other, with their community. Of course, the colonizers heard about all of it and they were like, oh my God, let's profit off of it. And that was the birthing of American jazz. But the beautiful thing about this moment, as he's telling me this story, he pulls out a bongo drum and he says, we're gonna sing. We're gonna sing together. There's a song that originated in this square. And I know that you know what it is. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to start playing it and singing it, and you're going to get it. And I was like, I have no fucking idea what this song is. I was like, I'm just going to look like an idiot because, again, I grew up in white as fuck Maine in New England, very disconnected from myself, and we didn't learn anything about New Orleans. So I didn't know anything about the history of Congo Square. I just felt very nervous and I was doubting myself. But it turns out he was correct. I did know the song. It was Iko Iko. And that's a song I used to listen to all the time when I was young. Heard it all the time as a child. It was like I feel like a camp song. But I'm literally just in Congo Square singing with this kind older gentleman, and it was the most serendipitous, unexpected moment during this trip. And as random as it was, to me, that felt like alignment with my ancestors and alignment with myself. And it was just beautiful. And get into how emotional that moment made me. And I feel like for some people, it just would have been like so random and like, what the fuck? But afterwards, I had spoken to him and I had told him a little bit about my life, my history, how my dad was not really around, learning about myself and how being here is an expansion of that, and how he was born outside the city. Mark was like, girl, he's like, this is your blood. This is who you are. And he was like, the more you understand it, like, you've come home. And he just kept saying to me, welcome home, baby. Welcome home. That day, that moment has stuck with me so strongly. I just walked around the park another hour, I can't even remember. And I was like, yeah, I'm home. Finally. You know, after I basically spent the rest of the trip just being outside, listening to the jazz that filled the streets, going to beautiful old bookstores, going to perfume parlors, swimming in the hotel pool. I went by the Mississippi River and I stood there just hours before I turned 28 alongside my friend who was with me. And at one point while I was there, I did get a reading, of course, a tarot reading at this incredible place called Voodoo Authentica. And I had a reading by this beautiful Black woman named Raven. She sat with me. She cried with me at one point, really being able to share elements of my story with someone who I knew empathized with what I went through, that feeling of racial degradation and alienation. It was so healing for me to be able to share that part of my heart with someone who got it, not just someone who had sympathy, but someone who understood. Anyway, not trying to make this story incredibly sad or emotional, but it was just beautiful and it was cathartic. But one of the things that she had said to me while I was doing my reading with her she was talking about my life in Maine, and she was expressing how I'm in a cage, essentially, by staying here. And that is something that I have felt for most of my life. I have always said that the reason why I've stayed in Maine has never been for me. It's always been for the people I love. It's been for my responsibilities here, my work here. All the things that I have here are important and beautiful things, but they are all attached to people. The people have rooted me here, but I don't feel like I am rooted here as a soul, as a person. And up until now, I kind of just went with that. That was like, okay, that was enough for me. With this understanding of who I am and knowing more about my culture, about my background, I need that. I feel like this phase of incubation is progressively coming to its end, and that feels good. And I just feel so much more secure in myself because I don't feel like I'm doubting anything or I'm looking for anything anymore. And with that, I have just never felt more at home in me. And at this same place, Voodoo Authentica, I also learned more about the deities Oshun and Yamoja. They had statues of these beautiful deities, and to those who do not know who they are African deities known as the Orishas. And I have been learning a lot about the Yoruba people, their practices, their spirituality, their way that has really spoken to me in my soul. And learning about Oshun and Yamoja have been such beautiful parts of that growth and that connection. I have just felt so incredibly happy and ignited by this part of my life of just exploration and discovery through spirit and history. I am not new to deity work. I have done deity work for the last 8 years. I have worked with the goddess Bastet since I was 20. She was kind of my initiation into the Egyptian culture, just connecting to Africa through her. That's a whole other story. And as I've entered this phase of my life, working with these two deities, really just learning what a relationship with them even feels like and their elements and what they embody and how I embody that in myself, because really working with deities is just working with the parts of you that they reflect. It has just been so beautiful and it's been so new, and I feel like such a different person compared to who I was the last however many years of my life. And again with Raven, she was like, you have to go. You have to go. You're a full-grown bird. I'm a full-grown bird, and I know how to get out of my cage now, and I just have to open the door. And it's been hard. It's been hard since coming home to Maine after that experience. You know, after I was in New Orleans, I went to New York, and I explored Brooklyn, fell in love with Brooklyn, fell in love with New York in a sense, when I used to hate New York. I used to talk shit about New York. I'm still not obsessed with like Manhattan, but being in a place like Brooklyn that is more diverse, has more culture, really just being in a city, even if it's not my beloved New Orleans, that celebrates diversity and the cultures of many is so important for me. And I've known that I would thrive in a bigger city for a while now, but understanding the reasoning as to why I need to be in those spaces and knowing that I need to be in spaces that put an emphasis on the Black community, that celebrate the Black community, is fucking vital at this point. And I've just been doing so many things to connect with myself through music once more and through dance, now that I'm not tied to this identity that I built around my photography and strictly my sensuality, but everything that encompasses me, from my culture to my spirituality. Every single piece is an important makeup of who I am, but especially my African lineage. I went to a reggaeton event a couple months ago as well, to just be in a space full of beautiful, diverse people and to feel unashamed and unafraid to express myself and be as vibrant and as lively as I've always been was just so beautiful. And I bring that up because I also learned that through my ancestry that we have a link to the Caribbean, in specific, the island of Dominica. Either my grandparents or my grandparents' parents may have been from there, probably on my grandfather's side, from what I've gathered. Even though that's many generations above me, you know, stuff like that it's still just in your blood. It's who you are. The Caribbean, Brazil, all of these places have always just whispered in my mind. And as I get older and I explore those places, everything just makes sense. And what I've learned from this is just to continue trusting my intuition, trusting the unseen, because the unseen is really more about feeling, less about the visual, less about the strict plan. It's just an honest knowing inside of myself. And that's something that all of us have within us, but I think that we have programmed ourselves so much to drown it out and to leave it behind. But when you actually show up for yourself, when you use your voice, when you choose to be authentic, when you choose to just listen, life really starts to become significantly less confusing because you know who you are. And with that, I just feel unhappy with my displacement because I know the problem has never been me. It's always been my environment. A really hard place that I'm in right now. There's a lot of transitions happening. There's a lot of things pushing me out. I've let go of so much, and I continue to let go all the more because the more I let go of what was never meant for me, what was never a part of who I was, I welcome in the sides of myself that have just been waiting. I feel like I've been shedding these false layers of skin, and I've just been returning to the ones underneath. As gross as that sounds. It's such a gross metaphor, but it's the best one I could think of. I don't feel like I'm experiencing an awakening. I feel like I've experienced a return, and I have progressively been returning through my love of dance, literature, and now my culture. I just feel more like me with each passing month, with each passing year, but it has become significantly more rapid in the last year with the acceptance and the discovery of myself and my bloodline, and no longer settling for shrinking because I don't deserve to. I never had a small personality. I've never been that girl. I've always been the free-spirited, lively woman of who Davina is. And Mama Africa, she's a big part of my heart, and she's a big part of who I am, and I wouldn't be here without her. So it feels really good to be able to return to her and to accept her by accepting myself and no longer rejecting myself the way that I felt like others did. Because really, I think they just didn't understand. But that's okay. They don't need to. The point of this video is that our heritage is important. Our history is important. To know who you are is important. To not leave parts of yourself behind. And that's the beautiful thing about African spirituality, is there's such an emphasis on ancestor veneration. I'm just coming home, baby. And coming back to Maine, my external home, no longer feels quite like home. The people I love here, they've made me feel at home. But those people, they're gonna be with me in my heart wherever I go. But me, if I leave myself behind, if I leave behind that fire, that burning flame, if I put her in a cage, then I'm doing myself a disservice. And I'm not doing that anymore. My travels are not over. There's a couple places that I still have yet to check out, that I still have yet to get the vibe for. There's one city in particular that is piquing my interest. I'm not gonna say it until after I go there. And it feels exciting. It feels beautiful to come back to this part of myself and to connect with myself in various ways, and to no longer feel comfortable with feeling like an alien, because I know I'm not one. I'm a beautiful mixture. As Maya Angelou once said, I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And I feel that to be very true for myself and for my father's people, for my people. And although, yes, I am mixed, I don't feel like I am not enough. I don't feel like the color of my skin defines my worthiness of my race, as I programmed myself to believe due to society. I believe that I am a beautiful symbolism of love and unison and divinity. And I'm enough exactly as I am. I will continue to find the spaces. I will continue to explore those spaces and explore my history and teach myself about myself and my people, because that's how we come home to that power. That's kind of the new news with me. And it's something I really wanted to share and I wanted to talk about, because I know it's a story that's important. And I know there's a lot of people in the same position as me. And I want to give a voice to that part of me that felt voiceless for so long. And to know that it feels good to be home. And I'm going to keep coming home. Right in here. So, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you so much. Until next time. Bye, lovelies.